I'm sat on this rock at the edge of the Sahara Desert to talk about something I think we take for granted a lot, and that is the idea that we can know things that are true above and beyond and irrespective of our existence as humans. And I think that the way that this comes up most often is in things like math and science, where we have this idea that there are certain principles that bear on our world regardless of what we think about them. And so we are mere observers of these facts of life. And I think it's important to point out the distinction that this rests on between us as an individual and the world around us. Because really, we're taking up a philosophical position which posits an absolute dichotomy between humans as neutral observers and the natural world which happens entirely outside of us. And this tradition of thought emerged in large part because of and in parallel to certain scientific discoveries that seemed to indicate that the world was truly mechanical and that our role as humans within this world was simply to observe and uncover these cause and effect reactions. But in the 20th century, and especially with philosophers like Wittgenstein and linguists like Austin, there started to emerge another perspective that challenged this dichotomy on the basis of language, and it really brought language into the center of human knowledge. And there are two aspects of language that were developed during this time that I want to particularly focus on. The first is that language has a fundamental role in distinguishing certain objects from others. And one way to think about this is in terms of the rainbow. So, in certain parts of the world, like where I come from, we have a certain spectrum of colors that we name, and we have Roy G. Biv, and we learn that these are sort of the ways that colors are broken up. But for those who don't know, there are other languages and parts of the world which divide colors differently. And this is often cited alongside other kind of banal claims like Eskimos have 50 words for snow, and like this is therefore evidence of how language shapes our worldview. But really, the important thing I want to focus on is that we exist in this continuum of sense experience. And what language does is it pieces out certain parts of that world and makes them meaningful to us. And so without language, we can't really have abstract ideas of a rock because there's nothing to distinguish the rock from the mountain or the palm tree from the landscape. These are, in a sense, fundamentally linguistic constructions which break down a larger continuum of experience. And as the example of the rainbow shows, that process is actually arbitrary. And we know that it's arbitrary because language changes all the time. The things that appear to us as salient and meaningful are not always the same. They're determined retroactively, they're determined based on our position as humans. And in this sort of carving out, it's also important to mention that language arbitrarily groups things together. So it doesn't just divide them, it also says that things belong to certain categories. And one way that we can see this is in biology with the problem of speciation. Speciation is one of the longest standing and most widely debated problems in the philosophy of biology, because regardless of the system that philosophers and biologists and ecologists devise to categorize animals, there are always edge cases. It's a field that is always evolving when we discover new species or new ways that animals relate to one another that don't fit into our categories of thinking. And so we have to understand that with language, we are always arbitrarily grouping two things together, which are fundamentally different, obviously, because no two objects are precisely identical, but where exactly those objects become distinguished or grouped together is not exactly clear. And the step that Austin took was to say that when we speak, we are not simply making observations or statements about the world which can either be true or false. We are actually affecting and shaping the world that we perceive. So I want to take the example of water having the chemical structure H2O. And this is a simple descriptive claim, which can be said to be true. And someone who believes in strong universality would say that this was true before humans. It is true now, and it will be true long after we're gone. In this universe, water has the chemical structure H2O. Now, the reason that I refute this claim is not because I think that the chemical structure of water will change once humans are gone, or that I think it would be different if humans had not observed that fact about the world, but rather that it is impossible to even conceive of such an utterance as meaningful in the absence of humans. The thing is that water exists on a continuum just like everything else. That is, are steam and ice also water, even if they have the same chemical composition? Or is salt water also water? And is soda water? Or is anything that has H2O water? Even scientific claims are, at the end of the day, linguistic utterances, and they take on meaning because there are other humans around us to perceive the world and agree with or disagree with our claims, and to agree that this is water which has these properties and this is not. And I think the closest thing you can get to the universalist claim is to say that water is H2O because that's just the definition of water. And so you end up in this tautology where you can say, yeah, insofar as humans exist on the planet and use a language which defines water as any substance having the chemical composition H2O, then water is H2O. But that is not a strong universalist claim because it still fails in the case that there are no humans to observe water or to observe that it has a certain chemical property. And so it doesn't strike me as problematic to make the claim that water is H2O by definition and that it will remain so insofar as human existence continues on this planet. I might not agree with it, but if you say that, I don't think it's philosophically wrong in the same way that I think it's wrong to say water is H2O will remain true always and forever, because the fundamentally social conditions in which this statement appears meaningful are not possible in a world without humans. And it is in this context that I want to return to mathematics and physics as simple products of human activity in a very similar way to human language. And yeah, there's philosophers of science who have dedicated a lot of time to understanding what makes scientific knowledge different from other kinds of knowledge, and that's fine and great, and you can say that certain statements have truth conditions that are observable and replicable and have the quality of being scientific, but at the end of the day, scientific enterprise isn't about individual knowledge that I possess about a separate world beyond me. When we reintroduce language, we see how science requires constant communication and coordination and agreement upon the terms within which the debate is set. So that's it. I think there are a lot of new and exciting ways of understanding science that are more grounded in the subjective human experience and pose certain limits on what we can